We could start?
Yeah, of course.
Okay, great. Good evening, everybody. And thank you all for joining us in this very interesting session. I would request everyone if they could mute themselves. And of course, please do ask questions in this chat, which I would be taking up at the end of the session. I'll just, so the session is very interesting, using linguistic quality evaluation to drive revenue. I'm sure this is a new topic which most of us would want to know more about, especially when there is a word called driving revenue is involved. So my name is Sudheen. I am president of Crystal Hughes Limited, which is a complete communication lifecycle company that creates content and localizes content in any language and delivers it in any technology, whether it is media or website or software. This session will be moderated by Sandeep Nulkar, founder of BITS India, one of the leading translation and localization company in India. Before we begin the session, I would like to give a brief introduction on our special guest, Steve Dept. Steve is one of the founders and co-directors of cApStAn. He is the company's hands-on CEOs. I think most of the LFP founders are. He grew up in South Africa, Belgium, and Germany, and received his primary and secondary education in 4 different languages: English, Dutch, French, and German. He studied classical philology and comparative linguistics in Belgium, but he is essentially an autodidact and a field practitioner in the field of survey methodology, assessment localization, and translation quality assurance. Steve set up his first proprietary translation and proofreading agency in 1993. And in 1998, he was sought out to organize the translation verification of OECD PISA instruments in 24 languages for PISA 2000 field trial. That is when he founded cApStAn, Linguistic Quality Control, with Andrea Ferrari. He also developed the translation quality assessment methodology in 2013, which is now part of the best practice in survey translation and adaptation. Steve is a frequent speaker at international conferences, and he serves on the advisory board of Cross-Cultural Survey Guidelines, University of Michigan. Over to you, Sandeep.
Thank you so much, Sudheen, and welcome, Steve. Welcome, all of you. I'm going to start with something which I found very interesting. Somewhere around 2006, I was at a conference in London when Renato Beninato, who with Nimsy, he was the keynote speaker there, and he started his speech with who in this room provides bad quality translations? And no hands went up, obviously. He said, fine, that now looks like a market to me because everyone claims to provide high quality translations. So maybe I should be the only one who's providing bad quality translations. And I think if the most used word in the last 10 months, they say, or the set of words is you're on mute. I think the most used word in our industry is surely high quality translations. And in that sense, I had this interaction with Steve just for the information of everyone listening. I had a preliminary discussion with Steve, and I was actually blown away by what he said. Despite spending nearly 3 decades in the industry, it took me more than 10 minutes to understand what he was saying. And that, I thought, was a lot of depth to the subject that we oversimplify. And it's one thing to say we provide quality translations, and another one to actually be able to measure it. And I think in that sense, this is going to be a very, very informative session because Steve really has a lot of information and knowledge around this topic. And I'm really looking forward to talking with you today, Steve. My first question to you is actually a very simple question. What most people would have on their mind: what exactly is linguistic quality evaluation?
Thank you. First, thank you very much for inviting me and for this fantastic introduction. It's a privilege for me and an honor to speak to the Indian professionals who are confronted with language sets of issues and problems from their birth, and you are fully aware of how much leeway there is in interpreting language quality. You feel that there's no objective way to define it immediately. You'll often have heard your clients or your critics say it doesn't sound right to me, or it's a little awkward, or you don't really say it that way in my language. That is not a quality assessment. So I have to step back a little bit. If you want to have a quality assessment methodology and you want to measure and you want to present a scorecard, a metric to your client, you need your client's help. And that is the most important starting point. Measuring quality is measuring to what extent the translation provided complies with the client specifications. Now, if the client has not given you any specifications, it doesn't mean you don't have any guidelines. You still have a number of things to go by. Yeah? But the starting point of quality control is asking the client to help you define the specifications to which the requirements that the translation must meet. If that includes a style guide, if that includes a term base, well, you already have one objective way, which is this translation complies with the term base, this translation complies with the style guide. And if it doesn't, 1 point less here, 2 points less there, and you have a metric. That is objective. No one will challenge that. Accuracy errors are linguistic or content errors, numerical errors. If figures are not the same, of course, it's a problem. Untranslated text. Unnecessary omissions or additions. Beware, because some additions are necessary and some omissions are necessary to keep the content equivalent across languages. But if there's an unnecessary addition or omission, that's a serious accuracy error, and that can be measured. You can give it a weight, and then quality evaluation will consist in defining what you're going to look at to give assessment of the quality of the translation, and you're going to give scores, weights to that, and have a sort of scorecard. Now, evaluation, in translation standards like the ISO 17100, revision is a given, and it's just that if someone translates, somebody else revises, and then you deliver to the client, and revision includes a number of factors, and your reviser must have at least the same competencies as the translators and more. Yeah? And then comes the market. Then comes, yes, but my costs and my time to market. What do I do about it? Yeah? And of course, it's a problem. So the first thing really is communication with the client, saying, listen, if you help me define certain specifications, I can deliver a translation and make sure that it meets all the requirements that you have requested. But then the requirements can be a bit vague, like, okay, I have a test in English and I want the test to be just as easy or as difficult in Hindi. That means that to assess that, you need to be a teacher. You need to get Hindi students to take the test. You have to look at the answers, see if they've understood it the same way. And even the best translator in the world cannot guarantee that the test is going to work the same way. So here your specifications would include, our industry. But that's the way it is. It's defining requirements and what is the best procedure to meet those requirements. If there is no time, if there is no money to do all of that, then at least propose a sample check. Say, we're going to look together at the source text. We're going to isolate 15 things that are crucial in your source text. And in the target, we're going to verify whether those 15 are correctly translated. If they are, we stop there. If they're not, in one of the language versions, we go a bit further. And then you propose a methodology. Having a methodology will give you more credibility with your clients, and will drive your revenue too. Because if you study the, I don't know, legacy translations, if you correct and implement the style guide that the client provides you, if you make a style guide for your client because he doesn't have one, yeah, and you enter that in your software, in your workflows, in your automated quality assurance tools, that has a cost, but that you can carry over to the client. You can say to the client, it's going to take me 5 days to put all that in place, but with those 5 days, which costs this and that much, you can have a scorecard of the extent to which our translations meet your requirements. That adds to the credibility, and the work you do there is paid by the client. Not all clients are ready yet to pay that, but it's really coming on. It's even in India. And so I'll say, first of all, or to conclude the answer to this question, translation quality evaluation is about moving away from subjectivity as much as possible and having a framework that allows the revision, the evaluation to be replicated. So it no longer depends on your evaluator. You train your evaluators to check compliance with requirements. And it's very hard for evaluators to learn not to invent mistakes or not to say, I would have translated that differently. If it complies, it's good, it's error-free. Yeah? And then you leave it there and you give it a good score. And that's a difficult concept to integrate because, of course, the translation can also be improved, or can be made differently, or can be fine-tuned. But if that's not in the requirements, that's not in what I mean today with translation quality evaluation.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think I would just like to summarize this for everyone who's listening in here. I think what really comes out of your answer, Steve, is that, of course, language and translation will continue to remain subjective. It's up to us as language service providers to objectify that by saying that we can measure quality. If the client hasn't really given you any specifications or guidelines, you actually create them yourself. It could be a style guide, it could be a checklist. You define quality and say that by quality, I need 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5 points, and this is what I'm going to comply with. And that probably already will help you kind of differentiate yourself from your competitors. Whether or not the client is willing to pay you more for that, I think they would really take home this point that you're serious about what you're doing. You have a very methodical approach, and that itself is a market differentiator. So, great points there, Steve. Thank you. My next question is, can you give us an example of who has really used linguistic quality evaluation and how did they benefit from it? As in any one example that you can think of.
Okay. Well, the first examples that would come to mind are large international institutions like the European Union or the World Bank or NATO. They have very sensitive documents. They have data collection instruments, and they will usually outsource to some extent in a quality audit. They will ask continuous improvement procedures, and they benefit by credibility. If big institutions publish materials that are going to inform policies, if those are poorly translated, they lose their credibility. And so they find it very important there to go an extra mile. So there's also the pollsters. The pollsters, they collect data in various countries and in various languages. And they want to be sure that the same questions are being asked, that those data are comparable.
Right.
So they will always go an extra step. They will not always do that very thoroughly, but at least they will implement spot checks. They will ask for an audit procedure to have scorecards or metrics for the translation quality. There's the pharmaceutical industry. Pharmaceutical industry, they have clinical surveys. They have informed consents, and these have legal issues connected to them, and well, also health issues. And you're not going to, for example, report about depression symptoms the same way in Africa or in America. You have different symptoms, even you talk about differently. So your question really has to be adapted, and they will use procedures like multiple back translations or multiple reviews. But they really need that and foresee that in their workflows, in their project management from the start. Who doesn't implement it yet? Well, for example, user guides for vacuum cleaners, they are usually poorly translated. But the vacuum cleaner producer knows he's not going to sell more vacuum cleaners with a perfectly translated user guide. So he doesn't invest. So it's more a matter of functional equivalence. What is the translation going to be used for? What sort of impact should it have? Is it linked to credibility? And that's where institutions, mainly international institutions, but also really smaller companies that collect data, will implement linguistic quality assurance procedures.
Okay, nice to know. My next question actually is to do with the revenue generation aspect of it. Would you say that linguistic quality evaluation is directly related to revenue generation, or do you think it's more of an indirect or collateral benefit, so to say? Because I can think of a couple of use cases where it can actually be a direct relation, and a couple of use cases where it might be a indirect benefit. So, what's your take on that?
I think it's more direct than what the majority of Indian language service providers would think. If you can demonstrate to your clients, present and future, that you have a methodology in place, you will be able to ask for a higher price, even marginally higher. But if you have that process in place and you're used to implement it, that marginal increase is revenue for you. Second, there's also a part that is done on demand. So if you have a procedure in place and there needs to be an external revision, you don't need to have human resources in-house for that. You need to have a good partner for each of the languages you work in, and he or she is freelance and works when you need. And then you can, of course, get your client to pay for that additional work in that case. But more importantly, in terms of direct revenue, I see now in India that there are companies who see this value of translation quality and who request it from the start. And they may even be in the language service industry, and they don't have time to evaluate their freelance pool, and so they want to send a sample of translation or of translation memories to an organization that rapidly can give a scorecard and an evaluation. And that is direct as well. It's not indirect.
It can actually be a service.
Yeah. So
freelancers can offer, or a language service company can offer.
Yeah. So we started 20 years ago, and we profiled ourselves as a linguistic quality agency in Europe. And of course, some clients would ask us, "Oh, but you have all these style guides now. You have all these term bases, and you have this expertise. Can you also translate something?" And we, of course, we shall not refuse that. But it's a different pool of people, and it's a different workflow. And a number of clients come to us to say, "Okay, we have a vendor for translations, and we're used to working with him or her or with that company, and they always deliver on time. But the quality is not always the same, but we're happy because we can rely on them, and they're fast, and they're not bad, really. So is it okay if you, as a language service provider, can just verify the quality of a selection of those translations?" And that's a steady flow. Each month something, where we're just asked to verify the quality. We give them this scorecard. We don't know what they're going to do with it. Other clients ask us, "Okay, give us a scorecard and please interact with those translation vendors. Explain to them what errors you found and what you recommend." I love that, because then there's a dialogue with the language service provider, and we work together to achieve something that is better. We don't want to be perceived as those who go and find the errors in other people's work. No, we just improve the overall process. But it can be a separate service. In this sense, it's direct revenue, and it's indirect revenue if you tag it onto your workflow and improve your service offer with higher credibility and measurable quality, at least in some respects.
I have a kind of a related question, which is how would you differentiate between linguistic quality evaluation and a very simple word that everyone understands, a bilingual review, which is probably based on some organically developed metrics. How would you differentiate that? So the kind of service you provide, how would you differentiate that?
Yeah.
We're just
So,
comparing a simple review.
okay. So first of three standard definitions. Revision is a word that we use to talk about bilingual review. Indeed, comparing source and target segments for accuracy, for localization errors, stylistic errors, but mainly it's comparing source and target, and we call that revision. Proofreading, in our view, or the way we use that term, is a monolingual activity. It's a test that is already translated, and you clean it up. You take away residual grammar errors or spelling errors or punctuation, but you're not allowed to do any content changes when you proofread. Yeah. And editing is also a monolingual activity. You edit a text that is in a given language to increase its impact, its local color maybe, but maybe you are inspired by the message behind the source, but you don't compare segments. So now your question is about revision, bilingual revision, and the simple bilingual revision is checking source versus target for accuracy.
Right.
Okay. And so traditionally, fortunately, people start being aware that this is obsolete. This was done just through back translation, where people would take the text translated in Malayalam and translate it back into English, and if it didn't look like the original English, then it was bad. Okay, and so if you had a very literal translation, it scored well, and literal translations don't work; they're no good. So it's not a very good measuring instrument. So this revision consists in, instead of back translating, it's having a second person looking at source and target and making edits if it's not accurate, making suggestions for change. But there's no evaluation there. There's just someone who you hope is going to improve the quality of the translation. If that person has a strong feeling about how things should be said, that person may make a lot of unnecessary edits. Unnecessary edits don't always improve translations, and if the reviser is revising one translation, but it's part of a set of other things, then he or she may introduce inconsistencies. So the revision for me is somewhat restricted notion, because it does not include all the tools, all the knowledge, and the holistic view. The evaluation is to improve the quality of the entire project, and so you need to train the evaluator for the specific set of criteria that you have agreed upon with the clients, and that's what you don't have in that revision notion. It's being very precise about what criteria you are looking at.
I'm sorry, I have another sub question, because I remember that percentage of our members are also language technology companies. Is there a way to integrate linguistic quality evaluation within a workflow which is automated and on the cloud?
Yep. That is the idea. You should work on APIs. You should either use Python or regular expressions or what your preference is. But once you have a style guide, once you have a term base that you already know as translation technologists, then you're going to encode rules that allow automatic checking of the compliance with the style guide, of the adherence to the term base. But you can go further. You can go further. We have programmed dozens of language-specific and project-specific rules that automatically flag non-compliance with certain conventions. It can be very simple. For example, the question mark, question mark in Greek would be a semicolon. So you can implement a rule to say that every question mark in this text has to be has to correspond with a semicolon in the Greek text, so that you know that a question is a question. Of course, that is very, very simple. Anybody can program that in 5 minutes. But more complex rules, well, you take a few hours and you can have the majority of criterion-based translation quality evaluation implemented in automated workflows if you have good translation technologists. And in India, you have the best in the world.
So what I'm hearing here is there is something in it for freelancers. You don't really need much. You just need a checklist or some set agreed criteria on which you're going to judge the translation quality, evaluate the translation quality. Likewise, for language service providers, there's something in it for the bigger ones, bigger players, the smaller players. Now, if this looks this good, my next question is, how costly is it? As in, if someone hires a professional quality evaluation service, are they going to end up spending more than the project itself? Or how does this work?
Well, I hope so. I hope they're going that they're going to spend a lot. But no, in fact, they don't want to spend that much. So we have to address that, of course. And that's why we often go with this sample-based approach, where together with the client, we select what is in their eyes crucial, very important. We say, for example, the professional terminology in that domain is particularly important. So we want to make sure that the terminology is consistent and well implemented. Okay, well, we'll look at that. That will cost you this much. We want, for example, if they say we have legacy content, and we want to make sure that all the legacy content that is well translated is kept, and the legacy content that is badly translated is discarded. Yeah. So you have to give an answer to that. You have to give an answer, which is a criterion-based evaluation of the legacy context, where you flag certain things that allow you to rule out this old content when it's no good and keep it when it's good, and make sure that it's consistent with anything that was translated before and is good. And that's part technology, part just mindset. Having your project managers, if you have 10 project managers, have 2 of them following some courses for translation quality evaluation, and having that mindset, and devising tailor-made solutions that can add, and here's a precise answer to your question, that can add anything from 5% to 120% to a translation cost, depending on the criteria that are defined. So yes, there are projects where indeed the client pays more for the quality evaluation than for the actual translation. There are also projects where they are so afraid of translation quality that they have 3 different people doing the same translation, and experts putting those translations together and taking the best out of them, and then asking an external auditor to review the final version. So all those levels exist, and that's why I have to be so broad. It's from 5% to 120% is our experience, with an average, I would say, of reality-based cost. Is tell your client, if you want the full translation quality evaluation with metrics, on average, I mean for all segments, on average it will cost you 40 to 45% more. So they will not want that. But they will often agree to add 10% to have the scorecards for a number of language versions, for a number of segments. So you must sort of wait, how far are they prepared to go, and tailor your offer to that. And the more you can automate and program and have your processes ready that you just recycle them and adapt them to your different clients, the less it's going to cost you. It's more a mindset and having a methodology.
Mm. So, talking about a mindset and methodology, can you probably give us a step-by-step, approach, or how do you think freelancers, LSPs, can prepare themselves for integrating linguistic quality evaluation practices within their workflows?
It's about striking a balance between customization and standardization. So, for example, you determine whatever our clients ask, we shall keep 5 main categories of errors. Right. That's an example. We will take the accuracy errors, the terminology errors, the localization or locale errors, the stylistic errors, and linguistic correctness, and we'll define them as such, and we'll automatically see to it that those are being monitored in some way in our workflow, in our project management. Yeah. So that's the first step, is define what you're going to build in all your workflows as standard. And once it's built in, it really doesn't add much cost to your production. Yeah. It's methodology, it's process based. The second is, for each project, for each client, define an evaluation corridor. We are going to review within this corridor, which is a combination of requirements by the client and what we have already agreed on internally that we'll do anyway. And you have to organize, and that is an advice to all the different language service providers who are here, is organize a training of evaluators, of revisers, so that they stay in the corridor that you determine. And the corridor, you help, you get the client's help to determine the corridor, but basically you will determine it. You'll see that the client usually doesn't know much about it. So you give them hints, you give them clues, and they say, okay, yes, that's a good idea. And then you have your criteria. And then I found that the hardest thing to actually get to a standardized methodology was training evaluators to stay in that corridor and mark everything that can be marked objectively according to those objective criteria that were defined, and to stay away from the rest, which is very hard. You see something that doesn't sound good, you want to change it. But if it meets the criteria, you should not change it. And so training the people who revise, or having guidelines for even if you work with freelance revisers, having guidelines for them. And in the beginning, having maybe an evaluation of the evaluation every so often, an evaluation of the reviser's work every so often, giving them feedback. But yeah, circumscribing it, defining it, and sticking to what you have determined.
So one of the things that come to my mind is it's not lost on anyone that India is a price-sensitive market. We are surely talking about a slightly higher cost, and if you kind of adopt linguistic quality evaluation as an approach, as a methodology, that increased cost, of course, can be sold as a market differentiator. Nonetheless, India remains a price-sensitive market. How do you see India as a market for linguistic quality evaluation? As in, do you think it's something that India is ready for? Would customers pay for such a service? And if yes, what kind of customers do you foresee paying for something like this?
Yeah. 10 years back, I don't think anybody would have wanted to look closely into marketing organic food in India. Yeah. And now there is a market for it.
Absolutely.
Yeah? But the people who started 10 years ago, they're in good position now. If you open a new market for cars, and in that market you have local cars, the fact that you open that market opens a possibility for the Jaguar and for the BMW as well. Somebody will want it. But these are allegories. In the language market, what I see is pharmaceutical industry. They need clinical service all the time, and they complain that you have very good linguists in India, you have very good technology in India, but there's a lack of methodology, and they are looking for, they're crying for people to deliver quality assurance of their clinical service and informed consents to them.
Right.
That is now, that is a maturity, that is not future, that is already there.
Already.
There are other products where I think very quickly those who will now profile themselves as having a linguistic quality evaluation in place in 2 or 3 or 5 years will find that the proportion of the players on the market who are educated to this need of linguistic quality evaluation will have increased. And if they already have their methodology in place, which will not cost so much to implement for them, yeah, but they will be in pole position for these emerging markets. But even in the current market, I really see signs of this demand that goes faster than the offer. The Indian language service providers are good in terms of they know how to translate, they have the technology, but they have no systematic methodology to substantiate that they deliver quality. Yeah, they just, yeah, as you said in the beginning, Sandeep. Of course, they all guarantee that they deliver top quality, but the quality should be an exchange between the client and the language service provider to define quality for their projects and show with figures, with metrics, with scorecards, compliance with those requirements.
Absolutely. No, I think the conversation changes completely, because the moment you have agreed with the end user as to how you're going to define quality, then there's no further finger pointing involved.
Yeah.
The conversation moves to a much mature level of service provision rather than a mere knee-jerk reaction. So yeah, completely agree with you. My question is, and it's kind of a direct question, but do you think linguistic quality evaluation is a full-fledged service, or is it just a form of repackaging proofreading? As in, and I also see something from LATAM Ways, is one of our members. I see a question there which is pretty similar, that you already have TEP, which is that's very prevalent in the industry. Now with TEP there, how is this different, or is it just a repackaged version?
Yeah. If you have a good methodology in place, adding scorecards to your service offer is maybe relatively close to what you would refer to as repackaging, because you're not fundamentally changing your process. Yeah.
Right.
However, revision, proofreading, they always come with their huge element of subjectivity.
Right.
And I think if you allow me to show an example of a score sheet,
Yes.
is that okay? Yeah, I can. Okay.
So I think what everyone needs to understand is revision is one thing, and evaluation is completely another. And here we are talking about evaluation. No matter how good the review or revision is, it's still very subjective. But when you're talking about evaluation, you're talking about taking subjectivity out of the equation completely.
Yeah. And that's where maybe there is part of that is repackaging, because if you already have a very good revisers in place and you systematically review the translations you deliver, all you need to do is organize that revision so that it gives you metrics as well, yeah? And so that you remove subjectivity from it. But you're not fundamentally changing what you're doing. So there, I could call it repackaging, but it's really worth it. And so, can you see my screen, Sandeep?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. This is an example of a horizontally structured score sheet where you have different levels. Here, the columns say minor, major, and critical. And so you add more points to a critical error than to a minor error, of course. And then horizontally, you have your categories, whatever they are. This is an example. It's not cApStAN's methodology. It's an example from a theory textbook to illustrate what we're showing. So you see spelling, terminology, omission, missing, meaning, punctuation, and style horizontally, and minor, major, critical vertically. And then you add up the points, and you actually have a score. Yeah? A bit more complex, and we often use this sort of sheet. That's the vertically structured sheet, where you have the intensity, the severity in the rows, minor, major, critical, fatal, and then you have your error categories vertically, and you put your points, your marks in those columns, but the fatal one is fail. There are certain types of errors that you have agreed with the client that if there's any of that type of error in the translation, it just doesn't pass. It should not be delivered. It should be reworked. And so a score sheet like that will add a lot to your credibility with your client. When you discuss your translation process with them, and you ask for help to define certain quality criteria, and you present them after that with a score sheet, they will think, "Ooh, these guys are really serious professionals." Yeah, and it's more a mindset and a methodology than a total change. Perhaps in the first years, you may want some help in setting that up. I think there are many consultants willing to set this sort of methodology up. There are all the people who prepared the standards, there are people who used to have language service companies and now work as consultants. It's maybe yes, some assistance if you don't feel comfortable, finalizing your methodology in a way that is presentable to the client. Maybe you need some help for that. Maybe it would be a good topic for the CITLoB to organize at some point a webinar to train people in setting up this sort of methodology. But I think that's the mindset and the interaction with the client are the keystones of introducing a more standardized approach to translation quality evaluation across India.
Yeah, sure. I think everything starts with a dialogue, and I think if you want to decommoditize your service, so to say, you need to move away from simply sending quotations and sending a day and date by which you deliver a file, and moving to a system where you're actually moving the conversation to quality, which is actually a taboo topic, because it's almost like both of them keep quiet. The client keeps quiet because they are expecting a good quality product, and the supplier keeps quiet because they know what they can give. But actually talking about it and defining quality and then putting all this methodology in place, I think that's the conversation that needs to start. It's really been great talking to you, Steve, and I'm sure there are some questions here. I can see some questions here, and I'm sure I want people to actually have their questions answered rather than just subjecting them to what questions I had in mind. So thank you so much for talking to us. I'm going to hand this over back to Sudhin, and maybe Sudhin can help us with the questions from the audience.
Thank you, Sandeep. Yes, we have some interesting questions. So I'll take the first question from Rupjyoti Barua. His question is Blue Score, is it sufficient for MT quality for automatic translation? Or is there any other metrics regarding quality?
Yeah, Blue Score is generally regarded as obsolete now by the machine translation community, because in fact, neural machine translation has become subtle enough to transcend whatever was measured with the Blue Scores. They measure with reference translations. So there is a problem with Blue, and there are indeed new metrics that have been developed. They have been made public too. If you wish, I can share a link after the meeting to what exists nowadays. but indeed, machine translation evaluation is still something that is a work in progress, because more and more we are trying to develop metrics that take context into account. If you just take segments, you can have a high score, but if the segment in its context does not work well, that is not yet detected automatically. But there's already a lot of progress made, and there are now indicators that give a better feel of automated translation quality.
Great. So we have another question from Mugda. How can a balance be struck between customization and standardization while revising a translated text?
Yeah. So standardization is what you agree on in general, right? So the standardization would be contingent upon a number of conventions that you set once and for all, and that all the people you work with need to respect. And you don't tolerate deviations from that standard because it's been agreed. And customization is what is specific to a project or to a language or to a client. And you need to do some of that. That is our added value as language service providers, is that we can be flexible, we can adapt to different needs and requirements. And we have to take that into account. But it's really up to us, up to the language service providers, to set the limits to customization. To say, well, we can't go that far because that is too subjective, or it will cost you too much, but we can go this far. And so you offer the standard as something that offers translation that is good enough, and customization as what is on top of good enough and meets the specific requirements of your clients or of your project.
Well, thank you very much. I think we have one more question. And so basically, let me just read it out. Most of the agencies and service providers, they face when they send a document for proofreading or editing or review. This is a typical problem that anyone faces. They are under pressure to deliver. Mm-hmm. And now this actually creates a problem when you're under pressure to deliver a document. Do you think the clients or the agency are willing to accommodate the extra time that linguistic quality evaluation may require? Or is there a way to maybe mitigate that extra time that is required? Is there a way? That's the question I believe the gentleman is asking.
It's an excellent question. It's very practical, and we need to take that into account. I would say there are two ways to mitigate it. One is automate as much as you can, which is write your quality assurance rules and embed them in your workflows, so that, let's say, 60% of your quality evaluation is done as the translation occurs. And the second mitigation is staggered workflow. If you have good automated workflows, you can say, once the translator has translated, let's say, the first 25% of this work, I send it to the evaluator. And while the translator translates the second half, the evaluator sends feedback, and that is taken into account for the third quarter. And this staggered work, if you're well organized, if you have a good workflow to monitor that, will significantly reduce the time to final delivery. Yeah. You have to be careful with that, because of course you can, towards the end of your translation, make a decision that affects things that have already been evaluated, and so you really need to have a good version tracking system and implement changes systematically. But it's possible. We often do it. We often tell them, listen, we need 3 months for the translation of those 7,000 pages. and we need 3 months and a half for a fully translation quality evaluated translation. And it's not doubling the time then. And that, yes, that you can negotiate with your clients. Of course, it's part of what you should do as a language service provider is to say, I need 5 days for my translator and 3 days for my evaluator. And so is 10 days okay for you as a delivery time? And then you have to respect that deadline. So you must know how much time you need. You must know your people and their capacity. But clients are generally amenable to negotiate if it's reasonable. If you say add 10-20% of time and 10% of cost, and you have something that's absolutely exceptional with scorecards, they will go that way. Not for all projects, maybe only for half their projects. But they will like what they see in that half, and later it becomes 60% of their projects. Yeah.
Very nice. Very well. Thank you. An interesting question from Pradesh. Do you have any open source platform to conduct quality assessment?
Mm-hmm.
Or can you?
It's a good question. Now, what we have done, we've developed our own in-house tools that are tagged onto the platforms of clients. They can be called up as as JSON objects, as routines from the client's platforms, and so it works with APIs. We occasionally do give access to this software, but on the other hand, there are in the majority of your open source CAT tools, there's the possibility to extend whatever quality assurance tools you have. In the commercial ones, it's a bit harder, but if you use something like Omega T is fully open source. You can customize it, and you can work your quality evaluation routines into your workflow with an existing CAT tool. So I think it also depends on the platforms your clients are working with. Because if you have a tool that works well, but it's not compatible with your client's platform, you have a big problem. That's why I think you have to be flexible so that you can adapt to their needs.
True. An interesting question, which actually connects with this. Does your company have the ability to evaluate translations in Indian languages, in case CITLoB members would like to collaborate with you?
Yeah. So the first time we were confronted with a project where translation evaluation was needed in, I think it was 11 Indian languages, was in 2009. And since then, we have many projects that require linguistic quality evaluation. But usually, for the moment, we are usually working for Western clients. They're Australian, they're American, they're British, they're French, and they work in a number of languages, including Indian languages. So yes, we do have partners in India who have been trained to evaluate. But I hope that our partners are not the ones that will serve your markets. I hope that you will be able to train your evaluators, that you will be able to to run your systems. But yes, of course, we're happy to examine whatever project or suggestions you might have. But that was not the aim of this interview. I want to bring about this awareness of the importance of language quality evaluation for the Indian language industry.
Thank you, and you have done that extremly well. Let me admit that, and especially linguistic quality evaluation is a, like Sandeep said, it's a taboo topic. Nobody wants to talk about quality, and but what you said in the beginning is right. It's very difficult to train people, especially not to do unnecessary revisions. So there needs to be some kind of methodology. If you don't follow that, or if there is no methodology, then of course you cannot really differentiate between an unnecessary revision and a necessary revision. So, and I think that's the key point. I'm sure we all need to really recognize and probably put in our workflow processes. So thank you very much, Steve. It was wonderful talking to you, and thank you so much for sharing your expertise and knowledge with the Indian audience. And I can't thank you enough for at least even I'm sure I'm walking away much more knowledgeable than I came into this session with. Thank you very much, Steve. Over to you, Sandeep. You're on mute.
Okay, that's our favorite. I just wanted to take the opportunity to thank everyone, including Steve. Thank you for being here. Thank you for spending an hour. And like Sudhin said, I hope most of us are walking back wiser, and that we carry something that we learned today back into our business and try and implement that. And if you need any help from the association or from Steve, I'm sure you can reach out to whoever you think is in a position to help you. We would not just like to, preach from a place where you can't really implement, but actually also help everyone implement what you learn from the webinars. So thank you, everyone. Have a good evening, and until our next webinar. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone, especially the international audience. Thank you very much. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for the excellent questions and for hosting the webinar. I think it
was a pleasure, Steve. Thank you very much.
Bye.
Thank you.